Perhaps it's a cliche to say, but Ferrari is arguably motorsport's most evocative name. For a number of racing fans, the word creates a synesthesia-like response where the brain immediately triggers the image of a scarlet blur tearing down the straight at breakneck speeds. It's truly a romantic image, although probably not if you were a member of the Tifosi in 2020, and definitely not if you attended the 1992 Italian Grand Prix. There, Jean Alesi peeled off post-Curva Grande with mechanical issues before even Capelli's electronics packed up and hurled off the road at the Parabolica moments later. It was strangely conclusive of the Scuderia's entire 1992 season, and the Ferrari F92A itself. The previous season had been a tumultuous one for Ferrari. Expectations to win the title were high after Alain Prost had gotten so close in 1990, but Ferrari's decision to update the 641 chassis for 1991 was perhaps not the correct choice. Prost was unhappy with the resulting 642's handling issues, and Ferrari quickly set to work on the incoming 643. In comes Jean-Claude Migeot, the French aerodynamicist who had pioneered the raised-nose Tyrrell 019, which we talked about in another video, to drive more airflow to the underside of the car, having first stumbled upon the idea at Renault on a bad wind tunnel. Migeot couldn't quite put that design into practice at Ferrari straight away though, and the 643 included a lot of carryover from the 642. But 1991 had inexplicably become a write-off, particularly when Prost was fired for suggesting that a truck would have more amenable handling than Ferrari's latest machinery. Now perhaps he had a point. Migeot describes the 643 as not bad but mechanically terrible, and the early end to the 643's development meant that Migeot could put his next brainwave onto Ferrari's next car. After the success of his raised nose idea, Migeot figured that there might also be a benefit to lifting the side pods too. On his arrival at Ferrari, he was determined to get his latest concept into the wind tunnel, the double floor. Although today's Formula 1 cars don't strut around with double floors, the effect that today's shrink-wrap side pods provide is similar, by reducing the length of the path for airflow to pass over around the car, and there's less chance that the air particles will, on a micro level, lose energy due to friction. It also exposes more of the floor, giving aerodynamicists a much greater platform to develop pressure differences and in turn downforce. That's an effect that Ferrari aimed to provide, and by reducing the aerodynamic hindrance the side pods provided, Migeot hoped that the F92A would change the game. Naturally, the raised nose made its first appearance on a Ferrari chassis too, but the double floor design was next, and between these two new designs, aerodynamics were improved and the car was given a huge boost in downforce to boot. But the original design was not without its issues, and the planned detachment of the diffuser at high speed, which cut the downforce in a straight line but crucially slashed the drag too, never managed to happen. So therefore at high speed the diffuser was churning out excess downforce, which caused a number of aero setup issues. In addition to Prost's enforced hiatus for 1992 after Ferrari laid him off, there were other political machinations at play. Luca de Montezemolo was made president of Ferrari and wanted to put his own stamp on Ferrari, bringing in Niki Lauda and Claudio Lombardi as his eyes and ears. Helpfully for Migeot, Montezemolo saw the radical design of the F92A and immediately fell in love with it, and, according to him, Migeot. Despite this love though, there were issues with the car, particularly with the engine. Ferrari had developed a new V12 engine for 1992, sticking to its tried and tested formula, but fundamental issues in the design meant that it was underpowered and unreliable. Lacey explained that the engine suffered from blow-by, that's to say there was a leakage of oil from the piston rings into the combustion chamber. This caused 40 to 50 brake horsepower to be lost. But in Ferrari tradition, it could not be said that it was the fault of the V12. Instead, the fault was attributed to the car, which is a shame because the concept was interesting. As a side note, in 1992, leaking into the combustion chamber was a crux for Ferrari, whereas in 2019, the prevailing theory was that leaking into the engine gave the car a performance boost, which is interesting, how the tables can turn. But back to 1992. In the Kyalami season opener, Nigel Mansell stormed ahead in his Williams FW14B, with Alesi 1.7 seconds behind in qualifying trim. Capelli, Prost's replacement, was a further second behind his teammate, and both drivers retired after both the Ferrari V12s packed up early. But the most damning indictment of Ferrari's new engine came in the second round in Mexico. With an altitude of 2,250 meters, the air is particularly thin. A turbo engine can compress the air to get around this issue, but in the naturally aspirated era, the F92A's engine had to work with the air as it was. So thin air and poor build quality led to a lack of horsepower coming from Ferrari's 1992 engine, which in turn meant straight line speed was rather disappointing. Alesi qualified 10th and Capelli 20th, both outclassed by the two Dallara cars powered by the previous year's Ferrari V12. Once more both retired, Capelli clashed with March's Carl Wendlinger on the opening lap as Alesi's engine gave up before half distance. Ferrari's fortunes were marginally improved in the early season. A double points finish in Brazil preceded a podium for Alesi at Barcelona, but his teammates' confidence was well and truly waning, made worse by the pressure of driving for Ferrari, and the team gravitated to Alesi, leaving Capelli with little support. Migeot's double floor was also starting to lose its support too. Alesi's two podiums in Barcelona and Canada were the only highlights, and although the technical team had been chomping away at the F92A's suspension issues, Migeot was lobbying for Dr. Harvey Postlethwaite, who had been Ferrari's technical director in the late 1980s, to rejoin and steer the good ship Maranello. Niki Lauda, now the advisor of the president, started a witch hunt over the car and its double floor, and Migeot spent the first part of the season proving that there were no quicker options. He said, "We tested in a number of tracks with the channel between the two floors blocked, and it was much slower. And all the silliness to try and go back to a conventional car was not a success either. So then Harvey came back, coming back in as technical director. Harvey was sort of convinced, sort of not convinced by the double floor, but he put a bet on the transverse gearbox, which was another step backwards for the concept, which required a very narrow gearbox. The longitudinal was much better." The car got worse and worse throughout the season, and Monsemolo fell out of love with the concept. Between poor car performance and political issues, Migeot was sacked. Ferrari's 1992 dalliance with double floordom had not been a success, be that down to the concept, the engine, or the meddling at boardroom level. But the key principles remain prevalent in modern F1. Famously, the Toro Rosso team attempted to install a significant undercut to its side pods from 2011 to 2012. The increasingly small side pods in today's cars have almost opened up a similar amount of working space, and it's now something we see almost unilaterally across the grid. Who knows, in the right conditions perhaps the double floor Ferrari could have worked, but the stars didn't align and the F92A drove in one of Ferrari's worst seasons in Formula 1, something which only the recent SF1000 has come close to in recent years. But hear me out, what about a third floor? No, that's probably too excessive.